All right. Welcome to the next process of scope management in predictive projects. You have done great so far, okay? You learned 5 processes, and we're in the last process of scope management in predictive projects. What phase, guys? Monitoring and controlling. What process? Control the scope. The only green process that is left. So, guys, let's recap. The first process, plan scope management. We created 2 documents, requirements management plan and a scope management plan, how-to guide to deal with the scope and requirements. Then collect requirement. We collected our stakeholders' needs and expectations and created a document called requirement list and RTM. Then defined a scope. Okay, we created a document called scope statement, that frozen list of promises to our stakeholders that, hey, we will deliver these lists and we will do these works. Then in create WBS process, we created 3 documents: WBS dictionary, which is supporting document for a WBS, and scope baseline, which includes a scope statement, WBS, and WBS dictionary, and its reference point to compare the actual work our team does with that planned work. Okay, scope baseline is that planned work. After that, we validated our scope. We presented verified deliverables, those deliverables that met our internal quality standards, to our stakeholders, and stakeholders inspected those verified deliverables and either accepted or rejected or conditionally accepted that deliverables. Now in control scope, guys, control scope process is happening all the time in the background. You'll see what exactly happens in control scope process in mini goal section, but here's the hint. In control scope process, you as a PM, you protect scope of the project, okay? You stop unauthorized works and you make sure that those change requests for the scope are handled in a right way, okay? Now, before getting into mini goals, let's have some mini terms that you need to know for control scope process. Let's get them done. Mini terms of control scope. Let's learn some terms before getting into details of control scope process. First one, control. What's this? I can't talk. What's this term of control even mean? Guys, whenever you hear the term control in our tutorial in project management, control means comparing what is happening with or versus what was approved and already planned, and take action if there is a difference and variation. Okay, so it goes for control scope, control schedule, control cost, control quality, everything. Okay, those 9+1 pieces of the project. Whenever you hear the term control, it means we compare what's happening, actual thing, versus what was planned. And because the team should execute the work as planned, but sometimes deviations happen. Sometimes there will be some differences. You as a PM, you need to control, always see, compare. And if deviations happen, you need to take some corrective actions. Corrective actions means you need to take steps to put the project on track, to remove that discrepancy and that difference. Okay, control means watching and then comparing and then deciding if it's on track or not, if it matches or not, and then correcting if there is a deviation. Awesome. The next term is configuration management plan. It's a how-to guide when we're dealing with different versions of documents and deliverables. Some documents or deliverables throughout the project will get updated. Okay, so we're gonna have different versions of a deliverable, for example, or we're gonna have different versions of different documents. Configuration management plan is a how-to guide for configuration. Okay, it defines how project documents, deliverables, and their versions will be identified, recorded, controlled. Where should you find different versions? These are all recorded and mentioned in configuration management plan. Okay. For example, what labeling format you should use. Should you use V1 for version 1, then V2, or other formats? These are all mentioned in configuration management plan. Where should you find different, for example, scope management plan versions? These are mentioned in configuration management plan. So it's a how-to guide to deal with different versions of deliverables or documents. And the next document or the next term is change management plan. Change management plan describes how change requests will be reviewed and approved. Okay? It ensures changes are handled in a consistent and controlled way. Let's say we do have different teams. Okay? One stakeholder, stakeholder A, requests a change to a deliverable from team A. And another stakeholder requests a change to another deliverable from team B. These two teams need to handle this request in the same way. How do they handle in the same way? By reviewing a document called change management plan, because it's a how-to guide. It's instructions, manuals on dealing with change requests. Okay? So, as we said before, X management plan means how-to guide to deal with X. So change management plan means how-to guide when dealing with any change in project. Awesome. Now it's time to get into mini goals and see what happens in control the scope process. Let's get it done. Let's get into mini goal of control the scope. Guys, what did we say about the term control? We said control means comparing what's actually happening in the project with what was planned for the project. Okay, now let's customize and tailor it to scope. So what's control scope? It means we see what's going on about the scope of the project, what's actually happening, and compare it with the planned scope baseline. Okay, this is control scope. So you as a PM, you check if the project is following the approved scope, and you spot all the deviations, all these differences. Okay, you zoom in and find these deviations and then take action. You always ask this question that, hey, is the team executing and doing the work that was planned and approved, or there are some unauthorized works? Scope creep. Okay, by controlling a scope, by doing and performing this process, you protect your scope. Okay, you don't allow unauthorized work, you don't allow scope creep, and also you make sure that any scope related changes are handled in a right way. Okay, for example, remember in validate scope we said stakeholders may need minor adjustments, so they raise a change request and say, hey, for example, add some electrical outlet to each room. Okay, this is a change request, and this is scope related change request. In control scope, you receive that request and you make sure that the team handles that change request in a right way. This is another thing you do in control scope. In summary, control scope process means go and check what's going on with the project's scope and compare it with what was planned for project scope and spot the deviations and take actions. Now, as always, you throw a meeting with your team, you're having coffee, beer, whatever you want. My favorite beverage is coffee, not alcohol, coffee. So you and the team, you extract the necessary information from some of the relevant existing docs, artifacts, conditions, which we call them what? Repeat after me. Inputs. Awesome. What are the inputs of control scope process? We definitely will use scope baseline because we're comparing the actual work with the baselined work. So scope baseline is the input. We're going to have change management plan. We learned that term. We're going to have configuration management plan, scope management plan, requirement traceability matrix, lessons learned register, work performance data, OPA. These are all inputs of this process. Now, then, to analyze, interpret, and transform those info to insights, we apply right tools, techniques, methods, and models. What are the TTs we're going to learn in this process? Variance analysis and trend analysis. Okay, two most common tools and techniques that are used in control processes. Okay, we also use variance analysis and trend analysis in control schedule processes, in control cost processes, in all other pieces of the project too. So we're going to learn these two in this process. And finally, as a result of reviewing inputs and applying tools and techniques, PM will create some documents or deliverables, or will update some existing documents. The outputs are WPI, work performance information, change requests, and updates to some documents. Awesome. This was mini goal of control scope process. Now let's see how inputs helps us in this process. Let's get it done. All right. Look up there, guys. Scope management in predictive projects. What phase? Monitoring and controlling. What process? Control the scope process, the last process of scope. And we're going to start mini lessons. And we start them with inputs, how each input helps us in this process. The first one, scope management plan. What's a scope management plan? How-to guide to deal with scopes. Why do we need a scope management plan as an input in this process, guys? You and your team, you open up a scope management plan. You go to the part called, for example, how to handle scope changes. Okay, you follow that instruction. So during the project, if a stakeholder requests a scope change, now you need to control the scope. You need to make sure that the scope change, that request is handled in a right way. Okay, how do you make sure that request is handled in a right way? When you know what's the right way. How do you know what's the right way? It is mentioned in a scope management plan. Okay, so you review scope management plan to see how changes to a scope will be measured and tracked, how performance will be compared to the baseline, who has authority to approve or reject scope changes. All the questions about a scope is mentioned in a scope management plan. That's why you need a scope management plan. Let's clarify with an example. A scope management plan says, one section of a scope management plan says, any work outside the approved WBS requires a change request and sponsor approval. Okay, so this is instruction. This is hint for you as a PM when controlling scope. Okay, so you extract this rule, and this rule will help you identify and stop scope creep early during control scope. Now, scope baseline is the second input that we use. I think it is obvious. What's a scope baseline, guys? It includes scope statement, WBS, and WBS dictionary. What's a scope statement? That promised list of things, deliverables, work that we promised, we as a project team promised to our client that, hey, we will deliver this list. It is frozen, okay? It is locked. Now, in control the scope, we said, you compare what's actually going on, okay, right now with the planned work. Scope baseline is that planned work. So you need a scope baseline as an input to compare what's going on with this, okay? That's why scope baseline is an input. So scope baseline includes approved deliverables and their descriptions, project boundaries and exclusions, and it's the official list of work to compare against actual results. For example, scope baseline says parking facility includes 100 spaces with lightings. Okay, now we extract this as our reference. Okay, it is in our baseline. So we as a team, we need to deliver 100 parking spaces with lightings, nothing more. Okay, now if a stakeholder asks to add, for example, a covered section to a parking facility, it's outside the baseline. Okay. Why? How do you know it's outside the baseline? Because you're reviewing a scope baseline as an input, and you know that, okay, it's not inside the baseline, it's outside the baseline. And it needs a change request. It needs to be requested in like through formal channels. And then after CCB's approval, you as a project team, you go and implement that request. Okay, this is how scope baseline helps us as an input. And the next one is change management plan. So guys, we said it's a how-to guide when dealing with change. It acts almost same as a scope management plan. Okay. Also, a scope management plan includes steps on how to handling scope changes. Change management plan is an umbrella. Okay. It includes steps for submitting, reviewing, and approving changes. Okay. Uh, it includes the forms, the logs, and review boards used for control scope process. It also includes who evaluates the change and decides on scope changes. For example, change management plan says all change requests must include impact analysis on scope, time, and cost. So you as a PM, you extract that the PM must first analyze the effect before forwarding the request to the change control board. So change management plan helped you as a PM to know the right steps on handling scope related changes, because in control the scope process, you also deal with those scope related changes and requests. Okay, you need to handle these requests in a right way. Where is it mentioned? In change management plan, also in the scope management plan. Okay, don't get me wrong here. These two documents have some overlapping information, of course. Okay, but this is basically how these three inputs helped us in this process. Now let's have a mini question and see what type of question you may get from these inputs and how they perform and helps us in this process. Let's get it done. Mini question. You are a PM overseeing a predictive project nearing completion. A senior stakeholder bypasses formal procedures and instructs a team lead to include additional reporting features, claiming they were always part of the original vision. The team begins the work, but during a review, you discover the added scope is not reflected in the approved baseline. Before deciding how to proceed, you need to confirm the formal process for evaluating and approving any changes to the project scope. What should you review first? A. Change management plan. B. Scope management plan. C. Configuration management plan. And D. Change log. What a question. Very good one. Please try to solve it yourself under 30 seconds. And I hope you get it right. If not, no worries at all. Let's go line by line and learn something from this mini question. At the end of the day, all of these mini questions and practice tests are there to teach you something. Okay? Let's go line by line. It says you are a PM overseeing a predictive project. Cool. Predictive means follow the processes, do the work in the right order, nearing completion. Okay. A senior stakeholder bypasses formal procedures and instructs a team lead to include additional scope, for example. So this is a very dangerous thing, guys. So we know we have a scope baseline, a frozen list. Any change to this scope baseline, any additional work that our stakeholders need from us needs to go through formal process, formal change control process, okay? We cannot just start working on something that is not in the list. We need formal process. Here, the question says stakeholders ignore that formal processes and instructs the project team, not even the PM, the project team, hey, do this, add this work. And the team, the question says, the team starts working on that request. So that formal change control process is completely ignored. This is not a good sign. Where are you? You need to control the scope. Okay? This is exactly the control the scope process concept. You need to make sure these changes are handled in the right way. How? By doing the control scope process in the right way. Where are you? You should take care of these situations. You shouldn't allow stakeholders to contact your project team, and you shouldn't allow project team to start working on unauthorized works. Okay? Go take care of your team. Now, the team begins the work, but during a review, you discover the added scope is not reflected in the approval baseline. Like after the project is done working on that unauthorized work, you discover that, hey, this wasn't in the approved baseline. You shouldn't be like that. Now, The question asks you to confirm the formal process for evaluating and approving any change to the project scope. And I'm sure you're between two options, option A and B. Okay, we said these two share some overlapping information. But guys, remember this, okay? Keep this in mind, please, that the right answer is A here, okay? Change management plan. Change management plan is an umbrella how-to guide when dealing with changes, okay? Scope management plan, just a small part of scope management plan deals with how to handle changes in a scope, for example, okay? Change management plan is the master plan. When in a question like this, okay, you see both change management plan and a scope management plan, you should always pick the master plan. But if this question didn't have change management plan as an option, the right answer was a scope management plan. Okay, so let's read the description. Change management plan defines how change requests are submitted, reviewed, approved, and documented. The question exactly asks for a formal process for evaluating and approving any changes. The question is asking for change management plan document because it is the document that show us how change requests are submitted, reviewed, and then approved and documented. Also, during control scope, this plan, change management plan, ensures that unauthorized scope changes, which we call them scope creep, are identified and handled through the formal change control process. Okay, it specifies who has authority to approve or reject changes and the steps required to update baselines. Why other options are incorrect? Let's go to option B, which was the closest option. Okay, scope management plan, how-to guide to deal with a scope. We know that, but it describes how scope will be managed, how scope will be defined, validated, how scope will be controlled. Okay, in that controlled part, there is a subsection on how to deal with scope changes. Okay, don't get me wrong, scope management plan is almost right option here, but change management plan is more specific, is more master plan that deals with all kind of changes. Okay, so scope management plan does not outline the formal change approval process. No, some of the scope management plans like includes these formal processes, but change management plan has a priority here. I think you get me here. Now, why configuration management plan is wrong? C, option C, because configuration management plan defines how deliverables and documents are versioned and tracked, not the approval process for changing a scope. I think you know that it's versioning, V1, V2, how to label, where to store these different versions, where to find them, how to find them. It has nothing to do with the formal process for evaluating the change. And change log is a document that records approved or pending changes, but the procedure for making those changes is documented in the change management plan. Change log is just a document that logs, records, stores these change requests. Okay, awesome. Now let's continue our inputs and see how other inputs helps us in control scope process. Now let's continue our inputs. The next one is configuration management plan. What's configuration management plan, guys? It's a document explaining how project versions will be maintained. Okay. Now, what do we do in control scope, guys? We said we compare actual work with planned work, and if required, we take corrective actions, and we also make sure that the changes are handled in a right manner. Okay. Now, let's say our stakeholder requested a change to the scope. Okay. And then you evaluated that change and you did the assessment, find changes impact on scope, schedule, cost, and then you presented all the information to CCB, and CCB approved that request. Now, what's your first action? You need to update scope baseline because it's a scope change, okay? You need to update the scope baseline. Now, first, you need to open up configuration management plan. Why? Because that plan, that document includes the approach you should use on how approved changes are recorded and tracked, rules for version control of a scope statement, how to keep different versions of a scope baseline. So when you update the scope baseline, now you're going to have two versions, old version and the new version. What do you do with old version? So you know what you do with old version when you review configuration management plan. That's why configuration management plan is an input to this process to control a scope, because it guides you when dealing with different versions of documents, plans, deliverables. Okay, let's elaborate with an example. Let's say, for example, we open up a configuration management plan and it says after CCB approval, please archive old WBS or scope baseline versions and just share the new one with all the stakeholders. This is mentioned in configuration management plan. So you extract this information. This is a hint, a manual, an instruction that guide you, okay? So you do exactly as explained in configuration management plan. You update the scope baseline and like a scope statement, WBS and WBS dictionary, and then you archive the old one and you send the new versions to all stakeholders, okay? The next input is WPD or work performance data. What did we say, guys? In control the scope, we compare what's going on actually right now in the project and compared with what was planned, okay? So these, what's going on, these are data, okay? We call them WPD. That's why WPD is an input to control the scope process. And feel free to read that example. Now, as we said, always remember the term tailor to context, okay? There are lots of other inputs that are used or could be used in control the scope process. This is a general list from PMBOK 6th edition, okay? Depending on your project's size, project's complexity, you could have less or more inputs. And remember, guys, as I said before, you won't get a question saying what are the inputs for this process, okay? So we always tailor processes, plans, and documents to our projects. And these inputs that I mentioned are not just final and frozen list. Awesome. Now let's get another mini question and see what type of question you may get from inputs. Let's get it done. Let's get to mini question. You are a PM in the execution phase of a predictive project. A team member introduces a small design modification to improve functionality, insisting it doesn't affect cost or schedule. Later, during a stakeholder review, multiple versions of the same deliverables appear and no one is certain which one is approved. Before deciding how to address the situation, you need to consult the document that defines how deliverables and documentation are identified, versioned, and formally approved to maintain control of project scope. What should you review first? A. Change management plan. B. Scope management plan. C. Configuration management plan. And D. Requirements traceability matrix or RTM. Very good question. Please try to solve it yourself first. Now let's get it done together. Let's go line by line and learn something from this question, okay? You're a PM in the execution phase of a predictive project. Predictive project, process. Process means respecting the order of doing things. A team introduces a small design modification to improve functionality. So a team is making some change to a deliverable, okay? So the deliverable was in version 1. Now a team applies and makes some adjustment and changes. So the deliverable, which could be a document, deliverables could be anything, guys. It's not just physical things. No, it could be a document. That deliverable now changes and have version 2, okay? So the problem is during a stakeholder review, multiple versions of same deliverables exist. Whenever you hear the term versions and when a question is dealing with versioning, labeling different deliverables, okay? The answer is option B, configuration management plan, okay? The question is asking you, okay, what should you review to make sure that deliverables and documentations are identified, versioned, and formally approved? What documents include these information? Configuration management plan. So the configuration management plan is part of the project management plan and defines how deliverables and documents are identified, versioned, and approved. It's a good point, guys. Configuration management plan is part of project management plan. Project management plan includes all of those how-to guide for different pieces of the project, 9+1 pieces of the project. Then cost baseline, scope baseline, and schedule baseline are also part of the configuration management plan are part of project management plan, and change management plan and configuration management plan are also part of the project management plan. So project management plan is a master plan including up to like 20 different documents. Let's continue the description. Configuration management plan ensures all deliverable changes are properly tracked and baseline integrity is maintained. So configuration management plan makes sure that different versions of deliverables are available and people, project team, or stakeholders have access to the latest version, okay? Everybody sees the latest version. So one team member doesn't see, for example, version 1 and the other one version 2. No, everybody needs to have access to same version. Configuration management handles this issue, okay? So configuration management plan ensures everybody involved in the project access to same deliverable, same document. Also, during control the scope process, it helps confirm whether a change was formally approved or represents a scope creep, okay? Let's see why other options are incorrect. Option A, change management plan. We know change management plan is how-to guide or rule book for handling changes. Change management plan defines how change requests are raised and processed and evaluated, not how specific deliverables or versions are controlled once approved. This is configuration management plan's role. Option B is scope management plan, how-to guide when dealing with the scope, how to validate the scope, how to define a scope, how to control the scope. It has nothing to do with different versions of deliverable. Then requirements traceability metrics. It's a GPS tracker for our requirements. It has nothing to do with different versions of deliverables. When we're talking about versioning, it is configuration management plan. And the cool thing is, guys, we usually don't have questions after input, but I put 2 questions on purpose on after each inputs slides, okay? One is change management plan and one is configuration management plan. So because students usually confuse these 2 plans. Change management plan deals with how to handle changes. Configuration management plan deals with how to handle different versions of deliverables and documents, okay? Please differentiate between these 2, and we covered what type of questions you may get from these 2 documents. Awesome. Now let's get into tools and techniques and learn variance analysis and trend analysis and how they help us in control the scope process. Let's get it done. All right. Let's continue our mini lessons and get into tools and techniques of control scope. Guys, what did we say about control, the term control? I said whenever you see the term control in project management, in tutorials, everywhere, anywhere, okay? Control in project management means comparing what's going on right now, the actual work, with the actual data with the planned data or planned work. And we tailor it to the scope control or control scope. What's control scope? Go and check what's going on with actual deliverables, what are being built, what are being done, the actual work, and compare it with the planned work and planned deliverables, scope baseline, okay? This is control scope. Now, the first tool, and keep this in mind. Now let's get into the first tool and technique, which is variance analysis. Okay, variance analysis is the technical term of comparing actual data with the planned data. Okay, this is called variance analysis. Variance means difference. Okay, variance analysis means difference analysis. Okay, it's a mathematical term for difference, or fancy term for difference. Now, how it works? Let's tailor it to the control scope process. Okay, variance analysis also applies to schedule, cost, anywhere, any of those 9+1 pieces of the project. But right now, since we're in control scope, we're going to tailor it to control scope. This is how it works, guys. 4 steps. Step number 1, you review completed deliverables against the scope baseline. Okay, you have completed deliverables, and this is a scope baseline. This is the actual work that team has done, and this is the planned work that all parties agreed upon in scope baseline. Okay, now in step 2, you identify the difference. Okay, by difference I mean variances between planned and actual work. In step 3, you evaluate whether each variance, each difference is approved or unapproved. By approved means, remember I said when a deliverable is ready, we present it to our client and our customer. Our customer may approve the deliverable, so that would be accepted deliverables, and it's all good. But sometimes our stakeholder and client raise a request, change a request to change or adjust something, minor thing or bigger thing in that deliverables. And this change goes through formal channels. And if CCB approves it, team will execute that change. Okay, so in step 3 of variance analysis, you evaluate and see if each variance, because the planned work will be different from the actual work, you should go and see if that variance, that difference is approved or not. Okay, and in step 4, you report findings, and if needed, you create change requests or take some corrective action. Let's elaborate with an example. Let's say in our scope baseline, it says we as a project team, we need to develop 500 parking spaces for our hospital project. Okay, but we go in the field and project manager present the parking space deliverable. We count it, we as a client counts that parking facility, parking spaces, and notice that there are only 450 spaces built. Okay, now you notice a variance of -50. Our actual work, our actual deliverable lacks or have less number of parking spaces than the planned work. Okay, so you now know that scope isn't delivered as agreed. This is your finding. What do? You initiate a change request and ask for 50 more spaces, and this will go through formal channels and CCB will approve it. So basically, variance analysis shows you as a PM that if the project is sticking to the agreed upon plan or scope, or it is drifting. This is exactly what variance analysis means. So variance means difference, and variance analysis means analyzing that difference and then taking action. This is exactly what we do in part of the control scope. This is just a technical term for the act of, controlling scope. The second one is trend analysis, guys. What's trend analysis? And also trend analysis applies to all other 8+1 pieces of the project, but let's tailor it to scope. Trend analysis means examining scope performance data over time to predict future deviations. Okay, so whenever you hear the term trend analysis, you may get a question on your PMP exam. Okay, trend analysis is for future prediction, guys. Okay, we have a bunch of data, we analyze those data, we find pattern, and then we predict future. This is how trend analysis helps us. Now, let's talk about application of trend analysis in control scope. It has 4 steps, guys. Step number 1, you as a PM, you track recurring deviations or unapproved changes across reporting periods. Okay? For example, let's, in the meantime, have an example too. Each month, the ministry reviews deliverables. For month 1, we have ICU finished, but 1 change request raised. For month 2, we have pharmacy finished, but 3 change requests raised. For month 3, we have parking lot facility finished, but 5 change requests raised. Why these change requests raised? Because our client, our stakeholders, didn't like something in that deliverable, so they raise a change request to make some adjustments. Okay, so as you can see, in step 1, you track recurring deviations. You tracked the number of change requests. This is a step 1. In step 2, you analyze patterns to see if scope controlling or control scope is improving or weakening. Okay, let's analyze pattern. Month 1, 1 change request. Month 2, 3. Month 3, 5 change requests. Is our control scope improving or weakening? By control scope means we make sure that our scope is protected. We try to have less number of change requests, less number of adjustment to our scope baseline. Now, do you think our scope control is increasing or weakening? The number of change requests are increasing over time. Of course, it's weakening. Okay, our scope control is weakening. This is step 2. Let's go to step 3. Now, we forecast potential future problems. Okay, now we know that with this pattern, month 1, 1 change request, month 2, 3, month 3, 5 change requests, month 4 would be, for example, 7 change requests, month 5 would be 9 change requests. So this is increasing. Okay, this pattern showed us that the future predictions are not good for number of change requests. You as a PM, you need to take some actions to prevent this from recurring, okay? Because our control scope practices are not working. You need to change something to reduce that number of change requests and have everything under your control, okay? So in step 4, you take preventive actions or update monitoring methods or refine processes. You take some actions to prevent this. So let's go back to our example. The PM notices a trend of increasing scope changes, 1, 3, 5. Okay, you as a PM, you notice that change. Now, this signals that either requirements were not collected well enough. Okay, why the signals requirements are not collected well enough? Because if we have collected all requirements of stakeholders, why would they request these changes? Okay, one of the possibilities, we're talking about one of the possibilities is that requirements were not collected well enough. Okay, or stakeholders are trying to add more scope, just their preferences. Now, trend analysis signaled 2 possibilities to us. So what do? You take corrective action or preventive action. You throw a meeting with those key stakeholders and understand their concerns. Try to resolve it and say, hey, okay, let's collect your requirements again. Okay, what's going on in your mind? Because we're gonna protect our scope, we're going to decline this number of change requests in the future. Be transparent to your stakeholders, okay? You throw a meeting and you mention that, hey, this is the pattern, this is the trend. If we go like this, the future predictions show that month 4, 5, 6 would be very bad in the scope side of the project. Let's protect this. Let's protect our scope and make things better and get on track, okay? So you listen to their concerns, what's their needs, and you try to explain that high number of change requests are not good for a project because it takes time, energy, effort, cost, schedule. Okay? Awesome. This is how trend analysis helps us in the project. Guys, as I said before, variance analysis and trend analysis are mostly used in schedule and cost part of the project. But here we built a good foundation of their application in scope part of the project. Now, let's see what type of question you may get from variance analysis and trend analysis on your PMP exam. Let's get it done. Mini question. You are a project manager monitoring a predictive project that has experienced several approved change requests and a few unplanned scope deviations. You notice that even though individual scope variances are minor, the frequency of these deviations has been increasing over the past 3 reporting cycles. To identify whether the situation indicates an emerging pattern that could threaten future project stability, you decide to analyze performance data over time. What technique are you using? A. Variance analysis. B. Trend analysis. C. Root cause analysis. And D. Work performance analysis. Good question. Try to solve it yourself first. And let's get it done together. Let's go line by line. You're a project manager monitoring a predictive project. Okay, cool. That has experienced several approved change requests and a few unplanned scope deviations. Okay, some approved and legit change requests and some unplanned scope deviations, scope creep. Okay, the frequency of these deviations has been increasing. So you've done variance analysis and the frequency, the number of these variants are increasing, which is not cool for your project. Now, to identify whether the situation indicates an emerging pattern that could threaten future project stability. This is the key statement in the question, guys. What did we say about option B, trend analysis? We said we have a bunch of data. Okay, we analyze the data and we find pattern to predict future. Now, pattern, predict future, pattern, future. The question exactly mentions these two key terms and keywords. Pattern, see, to identify whether the situation indicates an emerging pattern that could threaten future project. Whenever you have pattern and then you want to predict future, it's trend analysis. You're doing trend analysis, guys. So we know trend analysis is a tool and technique in control scope. It examines performance data across multiple periods. Month 1, for example, month 2, month 3, or quarter 1, quarter 2. Multiple periods to identify patterns or trends in scope deviations, okay? Pattern means trend. Then, trend analysis, we know that it helps the PM take preventive actions before minor issues escalate into major scope creep or instability. It's a good thing that all of those variances were minor, but if you as a PM don't take preventive or corrective actions, those minor little things will become big issues for your project. So, trend analysis helps you to spot these deviations, these minor issues, and prevent them. Okay, take corrective actions. Trend analysis focuses on forecasting future performance, not just evaluating current variances. Why other options are incorrect? Option A, variance analysis. Guys, variance analysis is for the current situations. It has nothing to do with the past performance data or past patterns, okay? So, variance analysis looks only at current performance versus the baseline, okay? Not trends, not patterns or other data, past data. And variance analysis does not predict future performance. No, it just looks at the current situation. Then option C, root cause analysis, which you're going to see a lot in other pieces of the project. But root cause, and especially in Agile, root cause analysis identifies the reason for a specific problem, but doesn't analyze patterns across multiple data points. So, as the name explains, guys, root cause analysis. We have a problem, and that problem have a reason. Okay, we find the root, the very first reason that caused this problem. This is called root cause analysis, finding that very first bottom reason. This is root cause analysis. It has nothing to do with the questions concern, okay? Work performance analysis, it's a general term, guys. Work performance analysis broadly interprets performance across multiple domains or pieces of the project, but not specifically focused on scope trends or forecasting. So it's just and analyzing how is the project performing and doing. Great. Now it's time to get into outputs. Okay, we've done control the scope. We've tried hard to protect our scope and make sure that all scope related changes are done in a right way. Now, as a result of doing this process, what documents we will update or what documents we will create. Let's get it done. Let's get to outputs of control the scope process. All right. I want your full attention. Look up there, guys. Scope management in predictive projects. Okay. I like this microphone, by the way. It gives me a feeling that I have a beautiful voice, which I don't. I'm sure that I don't have a beautiful voice, but this microphone is a magician, you know, turns my awful voice to a tolerable voice, I guess. Now, look up there, guys. Scope management in predictive projects. What phase? Monitoring and controlling. What process? Control scope process. The last process of scope. And here's the mini lesson, and we're going to get into outputs of control scope. Okay, so guys, after you check and compare the actual data, actual work and deliverables with the planned one, scope baseline, you now know something useful. For example, you know that your scope is on track. Everything is going as planned, or you notice or you have useful information that the extra work is being done, scope creep, or you have useful information that, for example, approved scope is missing, one deliverable is missing. These are useful information. Each of these statements are called work performance information. So guys, you will notice that for all of those 9+1 pieces of the project, like scope, cost, quality, schedule, every piece of the project, when we get into monitoring and controlling, you're going to have an output called WPI, work performance information. Okay, it is not just specific for scope. No, it's a general term. Work performance information is general document. Okay, we keep and store these useful information, not raw data. Like, for example, that feature is 20% completed. This is raw data. Okay, we analyze data and then we produce information. We create some useful information for decision-making purposes. Okay, we provide these information to decision makers, like, for example, sponsor or PM, or you are PM, but I mean your team does it for you. Okay, so work performance information are all of these useful information that you create as a result of doing control scope process for decision making. For example, guys, our approved scope statement or baseline says, let's have, 20 patient rooms. Okay. Now, actual work shows 22 rooms are being built. Now you compare the actual work to the baseline and you conclude that the project has exceeded the approved scope by 2 rooms. Okay, this statement is work performance information. You log it in a document. You keep it in a document for decision-making purposes. Okay, you share it. You turn these information then to reports, summary reports, and you send it to stakeholders for decision-making purposes. Okay, this is the scenario. This is the case. Our team has done 2 extra rooms. What should we do? What actions should we take? Okay. The next output is change requests, guys. So if a variance is found or stakeholders request changes while we're doing control the scope, the PM raises a change request. Okay. Let's elaborate with an example. Now, if the PM discovers a difference like the parking lot being smaller than planned, or stakeholders requesting an extra, for example, ambulance bay, okay, these are requests. This leads to a change request. Now, instead of letting the team build it quietly, which means scope creep, the PM documents the request and submit it to the integrated change control process, where it will be formally reviewed, approved, or rejected. So guys, we do control the scope. Okay, we compare actual work with the planned work. We find deviations. We need to take some actions. Okay, when we find a variance, a difference, we need to take actions. Any action we take, we need to raise a change request. Okay, by actions I mean we maybe redo something or rework something, or maybe we have to make some minor adjustments. Any change, any request needs to go through formal channels. So we raise change requests. That's why one of the outputs of control scope is change requests. Change request is a document. You fill out a form and you send out this request to the to those who evaluate the request. And the last output is updating some documents. Now imagine this, guys. We have a scope baseline. It says 500 parking lots. Our actual data shows that the team has built only 450 parking lots. You as a PM, you notice this deviation, this variance. What do? You take corrective actions. You raise a change request, okay? You submit a request to the CCB board and say, hey, we are missing 50 like parking facilities, parking spaces. Approve this, the team will build it. And CCB evaluates the change and approve it. Let's say it approves it. Now, before the team begin working on that request, on that change, what should you do? You need to update existing documents. We're in a scope, we're in control of scope. You should definitely update scope statement or scope baseline, your WBS, everything related to that change, okay? Before the team initiate the work, you need to update all the documents. So scope baseline needs to be updated. If that change affects schedule baseline needs to update it. If that change affects cost baseline also needs to update it. So all the affected documents need to be updated first, and then the team starts building that 50 more parking spaces. So then one of the outputs of control scope is updating existing documents. Now, I think now you know that by outputs, we don't always mean, okay, creating new documents like scope management plan or scope statement. We created a new document as a result of doing a process, okay? Sometimes output means updating existing documents like we did in this process. Awesome. Now, I think you deserve a mini question about outputs of controller scope. Let's get it done together. Now, my favorite part, mini question. You are a project manager analyzing the results of the latest scope review meeting. The team has documented several approved changes, 2 rejected requests, and multiple minor variances in deliverable definitions. You need to analyze and summarize how the project is performing against the approved scope baseline, including variance trends, the number of change requests, and the percentage of scope completed. So this information can be used in overall performance reporting. What are you preparing? A, work performance data, B, work performance information, C, work performance reports, and D, variance analysis results. Awesome, good question. I think this question differentiates well between data, information, and reports, and option D does not make sense here. So it's between A, B, C, and the correct option is, wait for it, let's go line by line first. You're a project manager analyzing the results, okay? The team has documented several approved changes, 2 rejected. These are some data. You need to analyze and summarize. You need to analyze. This is one keyword here. You need to analyze and summarize how the project is performing against the approved scope baseline, okay? You're analyzing. You're not just getting the data, analyzing. Then, including variance number of blah, 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 to the point that, so go to the last line, guys. So this information can be used in overall performance reporting, okay? So we are preparing work performance information, option B, and then work performance reporting. And then these information will be used for reporting. So guys, this is the right order of these 3 terms. We collect data from the field. This is called work performance data. Then we analyze these data and convert them to information. So the next one is work performance information. Then we summarize these information and convert them to summary reports to send to stakeholders. So this is called work performance report. Data, information, report. DIR, D-I-R. Data, information, report. Okay, that's why option B is correct. Let's read the description. Work performance information is an output of control scope process. We know that. It represents analyzed data, not just raw measurements, showing how actual scope performance compares to its scope baseline. WPI is used later to develop work performance reports for stakeholders. Why other options are incorrect? Let's go to option A. Work performance data, it's raw facts like counts or hours worked. It hasn't yet been analyzed or compared to the baseline. Work performance report, option C, it is prepared after work performance information is prepared. So that's why it is incorrect. And option D, variance analysis results. It's a tool used within control scope to calculate differences. It's part of the analysis that produced WPI, not the output itself. Okay. Awesome. Now, what? Can you go louder? Mini FAQs? You want mini FAQs for control scope process? You know what? Your wish is my command. Let's have mini FAQs. Mini FAQs of control scope. Question number 1. Does control scope happen after validate scope? So we covered validate scope first, and then we covered control scope. Both happened in monitoring and controlling phase. But does that mean control scope in real projects, in real life, does that mean control scope happens after validate scope? No, guys. Control scope is continuous throughout the project, okay? Validate scope happens whenever a deliverable is ready and finished, while control scope runs in parallel to monitor all work against the baseline continuously, always, okay? It is happening in the background because you as a project manager need to always control and see is the actual work that is being done matches the planned work, okay? You need to spot deviations, take corrective actions. So it is always happening in the background. Question number 2, does control scope stop stakeholders from asking for changes? No, guys. Stakeholders can still request changes, but control scope ensures those requests go through formal integrated change control before work starts. We're controlling, okay? We're not saying don't request change. No, we don't accept your change. No, we're controlling. We are forming, like we're putting everything in right channel, okay? For example, if a stakeholder wants to raise a request, it needs to go through formal channels. Team just can't go and start working on unapproved change. No. So we're stopping unapproved change. Question number 3, does control scope only deal with added work? I mean, scope creep? No, guys. It deals with both extra work, scope creep, and missing work, which is deliverables not being built as agreed, okay? Question number 4, how is control scope different from control quality? You're going to see the process called control quality in quality part of the tutorial. But here, as a short description, control quality, the team checks if the deliverables is correct, okay? Technical specifications. If the deliverable matches our internal quality standards. But control scope means the PM checks if the deliverable is part of the agreed scope. This is the difference. Question number 5. What's the difference between control scope and validate scope? So in validate scope, what did we do? Stakeholders check and accept deliverables. But in control scope, the PM tracks scope overall and prevents scope creep and manages change requests. Awesome. This was mini FAQs of control scope, and I hope there is no questions remaining in your mind. Now it's time to summarize everything. We've learned a lot in this process. Let's have a mini summary of control scope. Look up there, guys. We are doing scope management in predictive projects. What phase? Monitoring and controlling. What process? Control scope process, which is the last process of scope. And we're in mini summary, so it is the last slide of scope management in predictive projects. Let's have a mini example before getting into mini summary. Let's say our team finishes ICU unit. ICU unit is a deliverable, okay? Now, team runs some internal tests and make sure that that ICU unit passes our internal quality test. Let's say it passes, so it becomes verified deliverables. Now, ICU unit is a verified deliverables, okay? We go to validate scope process, okay? We ask our stakeholders, our client sponsor, come and invite them to see the ICU unit, which is our deliverable, verified deliverable, okay? We're gonna now do validate the scope process. Stakeholders like walk through, goes to every unit and make sure it matches their expectations, and they conditionally accept the ICU unit as a deliverable, but they want, for example, more outlets for each, more electrical outlets for each unit, for each ICU unit, okay? So they raise a change request. Now control scope process comes in, okay? You as a PM, you run control scope process. You make sure that change, that request goes through right channels, formal channels. You take care of that request, okay? You act as a guardian and take care of that request, and you don't allow your team to do unauthorized and unapproved work that is not listed in a scope baseline. This was an intro to our mini summary. Now let's start our mini summary. In control the scope, PM, which is you, check if the project is following the approved scope and spot any deviations. You constantly ask, are new requests sneaking in, like a scope creep happening? Are changes being handled formally? You take care of these concerns in control the scope. So where did we start this process? We extracted related information from our inputs, like our work performance data, scope management plan, change management plan, configuration management plan, and other inputs. Always tailor to context, okay? Tailor and use inputs that matches your project. And we apply data analysis techniques like variance analysis and trend analysis. So what's trend analysis, guys? We have a bunch of data from past, okay? We analyze these data, we find some patterns. Now, based on these patterns, we predict and forecast future, okay? Now, when we find these predictions, these are signals. So trend analysis gives us some signs, some signals from future. Now, you as a PM, you need to take some corrective action, preventive actions, so we prevent this pattern from happening in the future. That's how trend analysis helps us. Variance analysis, variance means difference. So we compare actual work that is happening with planned work that is mentioned in the scope baseline, and we spot deviations and we take actions if a project is drifting from planned scope. Now, as a result of reviewing inputs and applying variance analysis and trend analysis, we had three outputs, guys. Number one was WPI. So WPI is analyzed performance data showing what work was done and delivered. Okay, these are analyzed, not just raw data. Then, if a variance is found or stakeholders request changes, the PM raises a change request. Change request was the second output. Now, if a change request gets approved from CB, you need to update some documents like a scope baseline. If cost is affected, cost baseline. If schedule is affected, schedule baseline. This process also showed us that outputs shouldn't be just new documents. Okay, outputs could be updating some existing documents. And while doing control the scope process, you apply two principles. You as a PM, you apply two principles. What are those principles? Number one, you applied stewardship. Stewardship means the PM, which is you act as a guardian, okay? You protected approved scope from unapproved work. By doing control the scope, you always make sure you want to spot deviations, okay? You're protecting this scope, you're acting as a guardian, and you always focused on value, okay? You make sure that every request comes to you, that request needs to add value to the project's goal and project's benefit. It shouldn't be a nonsense request. Awesome. This was a mini summary of control scope process. And guess what, guys? We are done with scope management in predictive projects, and now we're going to get into scope management in adaptive or agile projects. So fasten your seatbelt. The journey has just started. We're going to have lots of fun, and I will walk with you. You're not going to walk alone, okay? We're going to get it done together. I'm proud of you. Let's go for it.